Hello and welcome to Politics Today. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. We are like yesterday and day before yesterday. Once again, we are going to talk about Afghanistan. Why is Afghanistan important? Because so much is happening there and the entire region seems worried. The way Taliban keep on expanding their sway. Yesterday when we spoke to you, Farah province had fallen in the hands of Taliban. Since then, and that was sixth, provincial capital that had fallen in their hand. Since then, two more have joined the list, and that continues. And nobody knows why is it that the Afghan government and Afghan forces, that the American government, their State Department, their DoD keep on reminding us are well equipped, well trained, and well staffed. They keep on capitulating like nothing. Why is it happening? We have to ask that question today as well. But on the other side, we know that Troika Plus meeting was taking place in Doha. It continues. And we still have to see what actually becomes of it. Today, Pakistan's National Security Advisor, accompanied by Information Minister, actually spoke to media. And in that meeting, they pointed out the hybrid warfare that India is actually waging against Pakistan, and the way Pakistan is constantly being framed through social media, through certain local characters as well, and internationally as well. So we are going to talk about all these matters, and in a bit I'm going to introduce the guest we have got in the program. Before that though, let us watch a report that our team has prepared for you.
Since Pakistan shares a long border with Afghanistan, effects of instability invariably spill over into Pakistan. Pakistan has been the biggest victim ever since this 20-year-long war in Afghanistan began. The Troika Plus meeting is underway in Doha, Qatar, with envoys from Pakistan, Russia, United States and China discussing the way forward for the security situation in Afghanistan. Pakistan's special representatives for Afghanistan, Ambassador Mohammad Sadiq, and Pakistan's ambassador to Kabul, Mansoor Ahmad Khan, are attending the talks. The extended Troika, as it is called, is discussing the current Afghan situation as Taliban make rapid inroads, capturing 9 provincial capitals in a matter of days. Pakistan is pushing for urgent steps to prevent further deterioration in the Afghan situation. According to a Foreign Office statement, Pakistan attaches high importance to the Troika Plus mechanism involving Pakistan, US, Russia and China. This meeting of Troika Plus in Doha is taking place at an important time when the security situation in Afghanistan is continuously deteriorating, particularly as the withdrawal of US and NATO troops from the country continues. Pakistan hopes that the meeting in Doha would help facilitate resumption of intra-Afghan negotiations with a view to achieving a political solution for a peaceful, stable and prosperous Afghanistan at peace with itself and with its neighbors. Pakistan is dedicated to become partners in Afghan peace and establish a secure and prosperous South Asia.
It has been almost 20 years since the US came to Afghanistan, and I'm talking about the ISAF forces, and still the political solution that is being sought has not been forged. And the question is whether it will be forged in next less than 20 days. What you could not achieve in 20 years, can you do it in 20 days? That is a big question. But of course, Pakistan has its own concerns. We have to talk about those concerns as well. One, Pakistan, as pointed out in the report, also shares a very long border with Afghanistan. Pakistan has fenced it, but still the possibility of a spillover still remains. On the other side, of course, we have these bad actors like India who have been actually exhibiting their immaturity through their media dialogues, through what they did at the UNSC and umpteen other places. We are going to talk about all these matters in order to help us understand these issues. In the studio, we are joined by Anwarul Haq Kakar Sahab, who is Senator of Balochistan Awami Party, and not only is himself a Pashtun, but he understands the region and he understands the topography as well because his province is adjacent to Afghanistan. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Sayyid Muhammad Ali joins us. He's a PhD scholar, teaches at Georgetown University. He's joining us via Skype. Thank you very much, Muhammad Ali sir, for being part of the program. Tariq Farhadi sir also joins us. He's a senior regional analyst. Also, he's an Afghan, so he will be able to help us understand these issues. Tariq sir, thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program as well. I have to start with the studio, and I have to ask Kakar sahab. Kakar sahab, right now, one question on everyone's mind. 20 years of training, so much money, $2 trillion, and umpteen other investments, and yet the Afghan forces are capitulating. Why?
I won't be able to answer why, but yes, of course, I can answer how they are doing it. I mean, they're simply melting away, they're surrendering to the onslaught of Taliban, which is very surprising, as you have said it yourself. Despite the investment of 2 decades and trillions of dollars, be it the Indians who have trained these forces, or the NATO, or the ISF, or the US Marine trainers themselves, if this is the kind of outcome, which is, some say, according to some policy, and as they explain it, that policy is that they are leaving the outskirts, or what they call atraf, to surrender before the Taliban, and they are concentrating in the urban centers. So if, and there's a big if that is the case, it seems to be a strategy of desperation. Because the internally displaced people, or the populace which is being affected and they are moving from point A to point B, are also heading towards these urban centers. So probably you are seeing a population which is supporting the republic, and a republic which is confined to the urban centers, and they want to defend it probably in a way Leningrad has been defended in the Second World War, which is a very bad analogy. I mean, for God's sake, this squandered opportunity of 2 decades and of trillions of dollars, if the outcome is that you are either protecting or making Kabul a protectorate, or Jalalabad for that matter, or Kandahar for that matter, this is very alarming.
But you said that they are cutting their losses and coming to cities. The question is, they are losing cities.
I'll add a bit of that. And the biggest population, which is in the rural Afghanistan, that would be either at the mercy of Taliban, or the newly resurgent private militias, the old warlords. They are being financed, as being reported in Washington Post and the rest of the international press, by the Afghan intelligence. So from where this money is coming, where you are sourcing these private militia and outsourcing the security of the rural Afghanistan.
And that is a very important point. I wanted to come to this question about cities, but with your permission, let me bring in the other guest as well. Muhammad Ali Saab, let me ask you about this question. Of course, you teach at Georgetown. You have this vantage point where you can see what exactly is going on and how things are being perceived in Washington, in the US. The question right now is, what explanation is the Afghan government giving how the way they are losing space to Taliban? And the question is, if they are actually cutting their losses and they are fortifying, why is it that they are losing cities as well?
I think that's a very good question, which has probably caught not only the Afghan government off guard, but also US strategists, because there had been a significant investment in training the Afghan army after funneling all those resources to keep American boots on the ground. I mean, the second big expenditure was training the Afghan security forces. So seeing them dissipate like they are, was not something that was anticipated. I mean, not something that the Afghan government claimed would happen, and it was also not something that had been anticipated by American strategists. And what is, perhaps most surprising is the rapidity, sort of the rapidness, if you will, with which this is happening. I mean, just in a matter of a few days, we have now, I think the latest figure is 9 cities have fallen.
Right.
And it's not...
Yeah, the number has gone up. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And it's not only, it's not only the number of cities, it's where these cities are located, because they have pushed, they have pushed now their influence all the way up to the Uzbekistan and Tajikistan borders. And, these are areas which were Northern Alliance strongholds. So the other surprising thing really here is where the Taliban are making their presence felt. And one would have expected that would have happened in Pashtun areas. But it's actually happening in the north of Afghanistan, which is even more surprising.
Right. These are very important points. Let me bring Tariq Fatahdi Saab as well. Sir, last time you spoke to us, you actually spoke about the Afghan Taliban strategy of actually expanding their control over the rural areas, not attacking cities. Since then, the apprehension, as you actually shared at that time, was that they are going to actually, when they attack cities, it is going to create, a lot of problem for the populace, and they are going to actually become immigrants. The question at this moment is that right now, the way Taliban is attacking cities and the way they are taking over is surprising. What explanation do you have for this, sir?
Well, greetings to you and our guests and the public in Pakistan who is watching us. I just want to, talk about this humanitarian crisis that's coming about right now. Latest attacks, for instance, in Kunduz. What has happened is the Taliban have attacked Kunduz, the city. Right. And then the government has come and responded initially. And the Afghan Air Force has come and bombed the center of the city. They have bombed the markets, they have bombed the exchange market, and the Taliban finally overran the government, and the government went to the airport, the forces. And today they just surrendered at the airport, and they just surrendered after a few days. But what has happened to the population? The population, as we saw in Lashkargah, is very much wary of the war situation. There is no rule anymore. First, the Taliban come into their homes and say, we want to use your front room to fight from here. And while we are here, you can cook us food. Okay. Then the government comes in and responds, and the fight becomes a street-to-street fight in the city. So, and this has happened to very normal people like us. Suddenly we are living in a place, and the war comes to our street. And we have not decided on this war. We are on neither side. And what do we do? So if we have children, we leave. So I have followed the people who have arrived in Kabul. They are in parks, literally. The government is totally useless. Can't do anything to even give them shelter. And women in Afghanistan generally have 5 children. It's one of the countries where women have children. And you see these families, when they speak, these look like educated people. They have gone to school. So the people, normal people like us, suddenly overnight war comes to their city. The government is totally paralyzed. The forces surrender. The people, either they leave because they're afraid of the Taliban. Either they leave because they don't know what will happen 2 months down the line, so it's better to leave now while it's possible. Either they leave because they saw aerial bombings of the government, which is not very precise, of course, and they bombed schools, hospitals, and then later they say there was a Talib in the school, so that's why we bombed the entire school. Okay. But the people have to leave. So there is an exodus of people towards Kabul today. It's really heart-wrenching when you see these videos that people send from Afghanistan, that normal people are now sleeping in the parks in Kabul. Finally, the government has said you can go and sleep in there.
Right. Right. Pitafi sir, I had to very quickly ask you about another very important thing. I don't know whether he's still with us or not. I think we have lost him, but we'll get back to him. You can hear me. Okay. The question was very simple, sir. Right now, all this exodus is happening, all this migration or displacement is taking place. The question right now is, where is all the manpower, all the weaponry? As it has been pointed out by Pentagon, it is clear that there was humongous investment in the armed forces, and they have air force as well. Why is it that people are fleeing from the forces rather than fighting?
Look, I mean, that's what the Pentagon and the U.S. administration is saying, but they knew from long ago that these leaders in Afghanistan are propped up leaders. They are not popular leaders. They have forgotten about their people. They have filled their pockets. The Taliban have worked in these communities, local contacts, and in most places they take the cities by negotiation. Sometimes there's fighting, but most cases in Aibak, Samangan, they took it by negotiation. Faizabad, Badakhshan, they took it by negotiation, and in Nimroz, they took it by negotiation. In Kandahar tonight, they have arrived at the prison. They have freed people. They are friends. They have freed their friends. So local negotiations by local elements. The government has appointed people all over the years from Kabul who have nothing to do with the province, and the Taliban, as opposed to that, they have worked with the local population. So now there is more. No, we haven't seen an uprising of the people against the Taliban. You see, we have seen uprising of militia forces around the traditional warlords, but those warlords also during these 20 years they became millionaires, and they have homes abroad, and I don't think they can gather enough forces to do something against the Taliban. If the Taliban start mistreating people in the future, because Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic place, there we have Shiites, Sunnis. If the Taliban mistreat people, there will be natural uprisings against them in the future, local uprisings.
But not today. And that, Pitafi Sahab, becomes a problem because International Committee of Nations is actually looking at what is going on, and the concern is somebody is going to be blamed by the end of the day. Allow me, sir, to come back to the studio. I will come back to you in a bit. Kakar Sahab, Senator Kakar Sahab, at this moment, it is clear who is losing, who is winning. Despite all odds, despite all investments, it seems that Kabul administration has become mayoralty of only Kabul, nothing else, right? And even their attacks are taking place. What happens tomorrow and day after tomorrow? Tomorrow being the possibility of Afghan Taliban actually taking over Kabul. And what happens after that? Who's going to be blamed? What exactly will happen?
Oh, well, to be honest with you, I still, despite all these developments, I do not see such an outcome immediately.
Okay.
Well, what the Americans would call it a reasonable interval. What's going to happen after 6 months or a year's time, that is also speculative for us.
Okay.
But yes, we do have a sense of preparedness on our side, that if such an outcome or such a scenario develops, what should be our responses? But prior to that, we shouldn't forget that the same Afghans who are on the side of the Republic, they are intransigent too, as much as the Taliban are, and they're going to give a last-ditch fight as a last battle, I do not have any doubts in my mind.
Okay. So that essentially means civil war.
That's exactly what I am indicating.
Yeah.
That is a very worst case scenario.
Right.
It would generate a humanitarian crisis. It would be bad for common people, particularly the vulnerable class, women, children, elderly.
Right.
They would be the
Minority
most
also.
at risk.
Yeah.
And even the youngsters, the adolescents, all of them, they would probably be used as child soldiers and God knows what.
Yeah.
And when you have a situation where these private militias are being encouraged by Afghan intelligence forces, and they are being funded, they are being given targets. So if that is the situation, there would be a worst sort of a, God forbid, bloodbath in rural Afghanistan and in the urban centers both.
This is second time you have brought up the issue of Malaysia as being weaponized. On books, on papers, and in reports, we keep on seeing this. The question is, when your own army is not standing with you and they are actually surrendering, do you think that any of Malaysians are going to actually stick around and support the Kabul administration?
Well, as far as my information is concerned, this is primarily the idea of the spoilers in Afghanistan, and that is India.
Okay.
And they are the one who are financing the NDS, who's further outsourcing all these funds to these private militias.
Right.
So the interest of the Indian regime is to keep this conflict alive. They do not want to settle it down. The peace is not in their interest. So if the conflict is ongoing, there would be a way of stake of India in the whole of Afghanistan to have some kind of influence or leverage.
Right. This is quite interesting. Muhammad Ali Saab, while we talk about Afghan Taliban strategy, of course, someone pointed out that they are following Kautilia's rice bowl stratagem. First attack brutal areas, demoralize the heartland, and then start attacking the heartland as well. And this is exactly what is happening. I can understand this strategy, but I don't get the strategy of the Kabul administration. If it is indeed about fortification, where are those fortifications? On one side, we have seen the defense minister's house is attacked, although he escapes because he is not there. His family is also evacuated, but it happened. On the other side, Deputy Finance Minister resigns and leaves the country. So the situation seems to be very dire, but what strategy do you actually call it?
Well, I mean, there's attrition has long been a problem. I mean, even with the Afghan security forces, we had seen, despite all the money being pumped in, we had seen soldiers leaving. We've seen soldiers, I mean, those high-profile sort of attacks of turning the guns on their comrades. I think as the situation becomes more tenuous, we are going to see attrition not only from the security forces but also from those in positions of power. And I think that, if we're looking for scapegoats, I mean, one also needs to have a critical gaze on what happened in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. And I think neighboring countries like Pakistan, when they are called to task on their role, given the narrative of the Taliban having safe havens in Pakistan, I mean, there have been major governance failures with the Karzai government, and now, I mean, these are not indigenous leaders. I mean, all the way back to the Bond process. I mean, if the Taliban had been accommodated at that stage, right, we would have had the last 20 years to come up with some kind of a power sharing formula. I mean, it's still possible, given the current scenario, where the Afghan forces take up as much territory as they can and use that as a bargaining chip. And it depends on the capacity of the Kabul government to dig its heels in to the extent that that's possible, and then rely perhaps, because I mean the US is also watching the situation carefully, and they have been trying to sort of think of ways to perhaps lend air support, have counter-terrorism capabilities. And I think on both sides, as we are seeing, Mr. Pitafi, as you're saying, the operationalization of the militias, on the other side, the fear is that on the heels of the Taliban, now they're being supported by Al-Qaeda and foreign fighters too. Right? But these are the initial surges. So come a few months from now, if the Afghan government is able to hang on to some of the power centers, right, then there's still a possibility of negotiation, with the influence of regional countries, I mean, Russia and China. But it's certainly not going to be easy.
Because we have been doing that for quite some time. During past 2 years at least, there have been dialogue and there have been negotiations. The question right now is, what kind of window of time do we have now? Is it only 20 days? Because after 20 days, the U.S. leaves, although it has pulled out most of its forces. But do we have more time, or only these 20 days?
I don't think that even if they pull all their forces out of the area, I mean, it is a legacy issue for the U.S. I mean, there has to be some kind of political accountability, and also it'll be quite destabilizing for the entire region. So I don't see that. I mean, this is an issue that's going to become old news in 20 days, and it's going to take some time for the camel to sit, and for the power brokers to reach some kind of an agreement. But I mean, it's going to remain messy for the foreseeable future.
Right. Tariq Farhadi Sahab, last time I asked you about the possibility or chances of a lower jirga within Afghanistan. You pointed out that no political leader has that kind of influence, and in the end you said the UN might be able to play that role. The next day, Taliban attacked the UN building as well. Now the question at this moment is there a window of time? Is there hope for any kind of negotiated settlement, especially when a power is ascendant, when it already sees itself as far too powerful, and the other side is failing to show leadership, sir?
So on the window of time, I think that within 4 or 5 weeks, Taliban will knock into Kabul's door from Logar, which is, by the way, the birthplace of President Ghani, from Chowk-e-Arghandeh, from the north, from Parman. And in each of the cities, in Kandahar and Herat, we have seen that there are people who have let in the Taliban into the cities. So in Kabul, it will be the same. The Taliban will, if anybody is talking about sort of security belt, there is none once the momentum is with the Taliban. They will be easily inside Kabul, and not all of Kabul, but some parts of Kabul, which is a city of 5.5 million people. So they are sympathizers in Kabul. So the situation will get tougher. We expect the foreign embassies, even the European embassies, to just close down, because nobody wants a Benghazi situation in Afghanistan. The European diplomats can take them. But as far as what can be done, so what we need, to put it clearly, we need a transition period in Afghanistan. That all sides agree to this transition period. That means that the Taliban have to agree to a government in Kabul, where the Taliban have said, we don't want to govern, but we would accept to govern with others, but we won't accept Ashraf Ghani. So it is clear that Ashraf Ghani has to resign. Will he resign or not, we don't know. But this is the path that the international community is already has heard this from the Taliban for the last year, that Ashraf Ghani has to resign. So 1. 2, there has to be a transition government. 3, can we find a face-saving way for Ashraf Ghani to come out of the palace alive? Because Afghanistan has a brutal history with its leaders. That face-saving way would be that non-aligned elements that are neither Taliban, neither Ashraf Ghani, and are weak in Kabul because everyone is beholden to one side, organize a Loya Jirga in Afghanistan and invite both sides and say, look, it looks like if we lift it to you, you will fight until eternity. And if you fight until eternity, you will also destroy the country and destroy the future of millions of people. So you should both sides, the obstinate Taliban, but it's very hard to, in the game theory or the war theory, to reason somebody who is winning to sit down and negotiate. But we should be able to. And also to Ashraf Ghani, that look, you're losing. Your technocrats, your army is surrendering. This is not the solution. And I predict myself that Ashraf Ghani risks, he has 4,000 bodyguards, and some of his bodyguards have contacted people outside on how to leave for the USA. You know, these people are also looking after how to come alive of this situation. Nobody wants to fight until death. So he will have to become smarter. Ghani, with whom I have worked, of course, know him well, but he's an obstinate person, but there is a point where his obstination costs basically the future of the nation, because if this
very quickly, because you have talked about the possibility of a Loya Jirga once again, and you have also highlighted that there still are 4 to 5 weeks before Taliban actually mount an expedition to take over Kabul. The strange thing at this moment, the irony of circumstances is these dialogues, whatever dialogues that are taking place in Doha. And Qatar is also the country from where the B-52s are flying to actually pound various spaces in Afghanistan. Is there a possibility of bringing dialogue back to Afghan soil?
Yes. First of all, on Kabul, just a very quick word. Kabul will not fall easily because a lot of people have become very rich and they have private militias in Kabul to defend. They are afraid of the Taliban coming and confiscating their towers and their businesses. So in Kabul, the fight will be different. In rural areas, the Afghan government was not able to deliver logistically forces, ammunition, money, food. But in Kabul, there is no delivery problem. Everybody is in Kabul. So that fight will be street to street and bloody. And we Afghans, we would like to avoid it. People like me, our job is to find a way before that happens. Yes, the Taliban will come in some quarters of Kabul, but the street to street fight should be avoided. So this is where we have to do something. Yes, in Doha, behind closed doors, there are talks of seeing if both sides would agree after an agreement to have about 5,000 blue helmet forces from a Muslim country such as Indonesia, which is further afield and doesn't have really any interest in Afghanistan. And the international community still has offers of billions of aid to Afghanistan. They will finance that through the United Nations for a government of 2 or 3 years so that we can steer the country through this crisis.
That's a very good point. It's not That's a very good point, sir. Allow me to come back to the studio. I'm getting back to you in a while. And Kakar Sahab, here's the biggest rub. While Pakistan is concerning itself with bringing stability to Afghanistan and trying to find a negotiated settlement, India, that you pointed out is a spoiler, is trying its best, and it has actually created a spectacle at the UNSC as well, to box out Pakistan or to frame Pakistan. In this situation, when our information minister, our national security advisor are telling us how your cyberspace is being used against you, and when propaganda is also, international media and everything is piling on, how to actually defeat this effort while not losing attention that we are giving to Kabul or Afghanistan?
Well, cyber war or responding to the cyber war, cyber attacks is altogether a different thing. But to be honest with you, the losing of territory by the Afghan government could not be taken while generating a trend on Twitter. You know, so that's altogether different.
Yeah, but they are giving land to Taliban.
So
and here they are generating trends to frame Pakistan.
Well, even then they're melting down themselves, and they are not realizing they are in a process of being evaporated. The Afghan state and the republic, whatever it stands for. So they do need to realize seriously that if the Indian plan, whatever the plan is it workable or is it doable? They need to ask themselves. In my humble opinion, it's not doable, neither it's workable.
Okay.
So what is required, as Mr. Farhadi was also indicating, a political plan is required. A political plan is required which can be sold to the Afghans, which can be sold to the international community, which can be sold to the region, and there has to be a negotiated settlement. No one is inevitable. And the graveyard is full of all those inevitables, be it Anwar or Ashraf Ghani Saab or any XYZ. Primarily, we need to avoid a humanitarian crisis. It is about common Afghan. They have lost it for 5 decades and they're still losing. They do not deserve this kind of a situation. Pakistan stands with peace. Pakistan have facilitated the idea of a negotiated settlement. And a roadmap is required, which can be talked about at Doha, Islamabad, Beijing, DC, London, wherever.
Kabul.
Well, Kabul is the last place it needs to be implemented over there, rather be discussed. Of course, all the players of the Kabul are everywhere in these capitals.
There is a
Afghans are diaspora.
That's very pithy, and that is a very good point. The question that I actually was coming to, and that's why I actually brought up the issue of hybrid warfare. It was pointed out certain elements from within Pakistan are aiding and abetting this propaganda. How do you take care of that?
In my opinion, all those elements within Pakistan or outside Pakistan, if they are feeling that they would seize this opportunity and they would somehow pressurize the state structure of Pakistan and would try to gain some domestic political goals, they're simply mistaken. I mean, it's a very serious business of statecraft, and the international community probably understands and appreciates this situation better than these Twitter trolls. They have spent $2 trillion, not the people who are trending that so-called ban this country or that country or whatever. Sanction. It's all nonsense. So what do you think?
So it is a distraction. One shouldn't worry about it. One should focus on it.
We need to respond to it. But we shouldn't get obsessed by it. You know. And the responses should be quite normal, and Information Minister and NSA is doing a wonderful job. They're responding to it.
But given that you pointed out $2 trillion that the US has invested in Afghanistan, they also pointed out, NSA, that India is also spending crores of rupees just to boost this effort to frame Pakistan, and that is a concern. One will eventually have to have a media strategy, international media strategy. Let me go back to Sayyid Muhammad Ali Saab, and this is the time, sir, when I will ask you to actually add your conclusion into your remarks as well. Now, what are the policy options that Islamabad has if the Doha talks don't succeed?
Well, if they don't succeed, I mean, it's going to be problematic, and I think then it's going to be decided on the ground. I mean, I do endorse Mr. Farhadi's game plan on this, and I think that there are possibilities if the regional actors can sort of have consensus. You know, because I mean, even if you look earlier, because of international pressure, I mean, we had Ashraf Ghani work with Abdullah and share power, right? So right now, and the Taliban have been doing this for the last 2 years, trying to use force, right, like not targeting NATO and US forces, and trying to gain as much power to have leverage over the future governance model in Afghanistan. So this was to be anticipated. It's happened rather quickly, which was surprising. But even now, I mean, there is a possibility. I mean, I do still think that the repeat of the Najibullah incident is going to be difficult. Kabul is well fortified, but it's going to mean a lot of misery. And there are, I mean, even if we look at India, while India might be doing, trying to bet on the Kabul government, at the same time, it's also been thinking about negotiating with the Taliban. Pakistan is not only desirous of just betting on the dark horse of the Taliban taking over power all over again. So I think even for the regional players, there is an interest in a negotiated settlement, right? And a negotiated settlement with the Loya Jirga. I mean, I agree that probably Ashraf Ghani does need to go. Right, and I mean, his performance over the past few years, I mean, how he came to power, I mean, there wouldn't be a lot of tears shed for his departure. And, and if this does not happen and we go back to sort of tit for tat, regional proxy, spoiler type of interaction, then it's going to be more misery for Afghanistan, and Pakistan will of course face the brunt, again.
Right, and this is a very valid point, sir. Allow me to move on to Farrukh Saab. Sir, your conclusion. Where do you think things can head to if not attended, and how to ensure that leaders are motivated enough to find that solution? Your conclusion.
Well, unfortunately, what we didn't want to see was the Taliban to take over territory to change the paradigm of the leaders. But it is going to happen at the cost of civilian lives, at the cost of people being displaced, all of that. So now the Taliban also, their strategy is to move as much as they can and then negotiate something at the end. We know that they are not going to share power with Ghani. They didn't accept to go to Istanbul. That was the clear signal, because Istanbul was a plan to put them together in a joint government. But I think that plan, the international community is still dreaming about that plan, but it's impossible. The Taliban now have a higher price, basically, for any type of agreement. But if they agree to rule with other people who are non-Ghani, that could be an avenue. India, I don't see the reach of India very big in Afghanistan. They have just had to close a consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif. So they are ready to leave very fast and even leave their friends. They can send some money to spoilers, but the reality of the ground is now like a wave coming. And India also will wake up and open contacts with Taliban if some elements haven't done already. Realpolitik has been basically what India has done during the communists, during all these regimes. Whatever regime comes in, if the United States says you should talk to them, India will talk to them. So as far as the Twitter war goes, I've been telling my countrymen that, look, we're not going to move Afghanistan from this neighborhood. Pakistan is our neighbor. We should have good relations with Pakistan. We have our challenges with Pakistan. We should address them in diplomatic arenas and debates like this. Yes, we should address them, and there are. But falling prey to a former ambassador of Pakistan who is unhappy with his own government in Washington, and Canadian diplomat who nobody listens to in Canada and has voted against the Muslims in the past over there. And for people who cried, who shouted Allahu Akbar in Kabul the other night, and then 2 nights later they shouted B-52, and then 2 nights later they shout, about Pakistan. These are passing waves. I don't think this way. The serious people know.
I wanted this to continue, and mashallah, your analysis is great. I'm told that we have run out of time, so I'll have to thank you and Sayyid Muhammad Ali as well for your valuable time and participation. I'm told that we have 20 seconds, 30 seconds for a conclusion. Do you want to add something here?
We should focus on a roadmap for a political settlement which brings an all-inclusive government.
Right. Senator Kakar, thank you very much. Always great having you in the show. Sayyid Mohammed Ali, thank you very much. Tariq Paradhi sir, thank you very much. Your valuable input has been helping a lot in finding way for all of us. Regarding what has been happening, we keep on saying that suddenly Afghan Taliban have started expanding, but we are talking about a story of 20 years. What could not be built in 20 years might not be built in 20 days. But at this moment, it is important that there are two kinds of people. One who want to save people, others who want to spoil the situation. It is important to remember that Pakistan is not only a victim of terrorism, Pakistan is a contributor to peace building in the region. Till the time this aspect is not grasped and remembered, solution in the region will always fall in the situation in the region will fall in the hands of spoilers, not the people who are the good guys who have been sacrificing and helping. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.